Does it still exist? Yes, it does. Okay, throughout the 1980s, the Reader's Digest was the most widely read magazine in this country, which is astonishing, showing what percentage of people read in the bathroom or so, having to go with the Reader's Digest there. And the Reader's Digest covered this and used the phrase, the math gene, and discussing how this was the definitive study showing that more boys have the math gene. Like, you already know that's like nonsense on so many different levels, but this was all over the place. This was the study that definitively showed genetic differences in math skills by sex, and definitively showed that this was manifest at a stage before there were different educational environments in terms of math. And what, of course, completely rips apart that study, and it was shameful that thing was ever published, let alone got as much attention as it did, is the fact that the environment was not exactly the same. Endless number of studies have shown, beginning by first grade, if it is a simple math problem at that stage, for the same hands put up, a boy is more likely to be called on than a girl. Studies showing that for the same correct answer, boys in elementary schools are more likely to be praised for the correct answer than are girls. By the time junior high school is coming around, guidance counselors are already differentially by sex advising, once you get into high school, to take more elective math. Tremendous, massive differences in environment. And this study, using this whole argument of if there's an identical environment and you see differences, it's due to genes. And predicated on that, if that's not true an hour after life, it was ludicrous that they were making this argument about 13-year-olds. So this was a paper with enormous influence in every major newspaper in the country. Scientists have discovered the math gene, and boys have them more than girls. We will come back to that study later on because something much, much more interesting is going on. Okay, so those are the limits in the sex difference end of it. So what can you do next? There's a flip side, another approach that the behavior geneticists use, which is basically the converse. Now you look at individuals getting raised in the same environment who don't share genes. Same environment, different genes, rather than just now the different genes, same environment nonsense about gender differences, even down to monozygotic twins, all of that. But now the flip side, same environment and different genes. What was the paradigm for this? The one that is used over and over and over again, the standard approach in this part of the field, is adoption studies. You take someone who is adopted as a child, and they are now raised in a household of people who they are not related to. They're adoptive, non-biological parents. And what you now begin to look at are patterns of shared traits. Specifically, what is looked at is when you see a trait in someone who was adopted, who are they more likely to share that trait with? Their biological parents or parent, or with an adoptive parent. Now, the logic of this is completely straightforward, and this has been sort of the standard paradigm in animal studies of the genetics of behavior for centuries, something called cross-fostering. You take a newborn litter and another newborn litter, and you switch them between moms so that they're raised by different moms, and they're raised with thus someone they're not related to, but someone who they now have environmental shared with them. Or in the litter, the cross-fostering studies, you will take half of a litter and switch it to another mother, half, so you see how the iterations there go. So that was essentially the rationale for how this would be done in humans. And this was the basis of one study in the late 60s, early 70s, which was the landmark study in genetic psychiatry, in behavioral genetics as a whole, a study carried out by a guy at Harvard named Seymour Ketty. And this was a phenomenal study and phenomenally important. Here's what Ketty did. Ketty was dealing with the notion at the time of making sense of schizophrenia. And as we will see when we get to the schizophrenia lecture, the number of nutty ideas out there as to what the cause of this disease is just staggering. But what he was interested in was getting at the notion that was kind of